Hi, my name's David, and I was handcuffed outside my own family's company while employees watched, phones recording, because my stepbrother called me a fraud. He said I didn't belong, that I was just some nobody from the woods, pretending. He smiled when they locked the cuffs. What he didn't know? I owned 51% of everything he thought was his. But by the time the truth came out, it wasn't victory I felt. It was something colder. So now I ask you, what would you do if the people who raised you spent years building a lie just to erase you? The air that morning had a sharp edge to it. Not freezing, but cold enough to wake you up the moment you stepped out of the car. I pulled my coat tighter and stood for a second, looking through the windshield at the familiar stretch of glass buildings ahead. Steel, concrete, clean lines. The company logo sat high above the main entrance, unchanged. I had seen it most of my life. I just hadn't seen it from this angle in a long time. I parked where visitors usually did, not in the executive row. Old habits die hard. As I walked toward the front gates, the sound of my steps echoed faintly against the pavement. Everything looked the same, too much the same. That gave me a quiet sense of reassurance I didn't fully trust. I had been here before, many times. Meetings, late nights, uncomfortable family lunches held in conference rooms that pretended to be neutral ground. I didn't announce myself. I never had. I believed, maybe foolishly, that belonging didn't need to be declared out loud. The metal turnstile waited, clean and cold to the touch. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my keycard. It was a little worn around the edges, but still solid. I slid it through the scanner. A red light blinked back at me. I paused, thinking I had swiped it too fast. I tried again. Slower this time. The same red glow answered me, steady and final. The security guard behind the desk glanced at his screen, then at me, then back at the screen. He cleared his throat. His posture stiffened the way people do when rules give them cover. "This access was revoked," he said. His voice stayed flat, professional. He didn't meet my eyes. I nodded once, not because I agreed, but because I understood what he was really saying. The system had already decided. People walked past us in quiet streams, men and women with coffee cups, phones pressed to their ears, jackets marked with the company logo. A few faces were familiar. One man slowed for half a second, recognition flickering, then looked away as if distracted by a message on his phone. Another nodded politely, the way you acknowledge a stranger you think you might know from somewhere else. Invisibility makes more noise than open insults. It presses in on you from all sides. I thought about leaving. I even took a small step back. Then I stopped. I didn't know why yet. I just knew I wasn't done standing there. That was when I heard his voice. Well, this is a surprise. My stepbrother came through the side entrance with two people trailing behind him, both laughing at something he'd said. His coat was perfectly fitted, his hair untouched by the wind. He glanced at the gate, then at me, and smiled. Not the kind that reaches the eyes. "You get turned around?" he asked, loud enough for the guard and the people nearby to hear. "This isn't really your kind of place." Someone behind him let out a quiet chuckle. He didn't stop walking, just slowed enough to enjoy the moment. "Parking's out back," he added, almost kindly. "By the service road." I felt the words land, small, precise. He had always been good at that, making sure the cut didn't bleed too much in public. I didn't answer him. I kept my gaze on the gate, on the thin red line that had replaced the green one I expected to see. Speaking now would only give him what he wanted: a reaction, proof that he had chosen my role correctly. He waited a second, then shrugged, already bored. "Take care," he said, and moved on, his attention shifting to something more important than me. The guard pretended to adjust his monitor. I slipped the card back into my pocket. It felt heavier than it should have. I stood there a moment longer, the cold working its way through my coat. He thought locking me out would end the conversation. I didn't leave, not right away. I stepped away from the turnstile and walked along the side path that led toward the executive entrance. It wasn't forbidden territory, just quieter, fewer eyes. I told myself someone would notice. Someone always had before. Even when they didn't agree with me, there had usually been a look, a word, some acknowledgement that I was still part of the picture. I stood there long enough for the cold to settle into my shoulders. The building doors slid open and closed in steady rhythm. People came and went with the practiced ease of those who knew exactly where they belonged. A familiar sedan pulled into the executive parking zone. I recognized it before the engine cut off. My father stepped out, straightening his coat as he always did, like posture alone could keep things orderly. For a moment, our eyes met across the pavement. I waited. He hesitated, just a fraction of a second. Then his phone buzzed, or at least he pretended it did. His gaze shifted. He walked on without changing pace. That was when the expectation I'd been holding finally cracked. Not loudly. More like a hairline fracture you don't feel until pressure finds it. Inside, near the glass corridor that overlooked the courtyard, a small cluster of familiar figures had gathered. People whose names carried weight without being printed on doors. They spoke in low voices, leaning in toward one another, expressions carefully neutral. I knew most of them. Some had shaken my hand warmly in the past. Some had asked for my opinion when it suited them. Now they glanced at me, then away. One woman offered a tight smile before turning back to her conversation. Another man adjusted his glasses and stared at the floor display like it suddenly required his full attention. No one asked why I was standing there. No one asked why I hadn't come inside through the main gate. Silence wasn't absence, it was a decision. I walked closer, close enough to hear fragments of conversation. Budget revisions, scheduling conflicts. A board dinner moved to next week. Normal things, the kind of talk that pretends nothing unusual is happening, even when everyone knows better. A digital screen near the wall cycled through meeting agendas. I glanced at it without much thought at first. Then I looked again. My name wasn't there. It should have been. It had been, as recently as last week. In its place sat another name, cleanly typed, properly formatted, no strike-throughs, no footnotes. Just gone. As if I'd never occupied that space at all. I felt a strange calm settle in, the kind that comes when confusion gives way to clarity. A junior assistant noticed where I was looking. She followed my gaze, then shifted uncomfortably. "They updated the agenda this morning," she said, lowering her voice. "It's just an update." I nodded, because that was easier than asking who had decided I no longer needed to be informed. For a moment, I considered saying something, calling my father's name, asking for a private word. I ran through the likely outcomes in my head, raised voices, side glances, someone labeling me as emotional, someone else reminding me how complicated things were right now. I'd heard all of it before. Let it go. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Keep the peace. Peace, I had learned, was often just another word for compliance. My stepbrother appeared beside me without announcement, close enough that I could smell his cologne. He didn't look at the screen. He didn't need to. Schedules change, he said lightly. You understand how it is. There was nothing confrontational in his tone. Anyone listening would hear courtesy, consideration even. But the message underneath was clear enough. This wasn't a mistake, and it wasn't temporary. I watched him walk away, absorbed seamlessly back into the circle that had quietly closed its ranks. I stood there, surrounded by people who knew my name, my history, my place in the family. And yet, in that moment, I had never felt further outside. That was the moment I understood this wasn't a misunderstanding. I moved away from the glass corridor before anyone could decide to speak to me out of obligation. My feet carried me along the quieter edge of the campus, past trimmed hedges and a low concrete wall that overlooked the parking structure. Cars slid in and out below, engines humming, lives continuing. I leaned my forearms on the cool surface and let my eyes rest on nothing in particular. The morning replayed itself without permission. The gate, the red light, my father's eyes drifting away, the empty space where my name should have been. None of it felt loud anymore. It felt settled, like something that had been waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. I had learned how to endure early. Being the youngest meant you watched more than you spoke. Being raised far from the city meant you learned to adapt fast or get dismissed. At home, problems were handled quietly. You didn't interrupt. You didn't demand explanations. You learned that patience looked like maturity from the outside, even when it felt like shrinking on the inside. Adults praised me for being easy. Teachers said I was level-headed. Family members called me steady. No one ever asked what it cost. Silence became a habit long before it became a strategy. I remembered mornings on the farm when the day started before the sun. Work came first, questions later. My mother used to say, "Keep your head down. People respect that." I believed her. For a long time, it worked well enough. But respect earned through quiet has a shelf life. The memory that followed came uninvited but welcome. My grandfather's study, a narrow room with tall shelves and a wide desk worn smooth by decades of use. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. When he looked at you, you felt seen in a way that didn't require approval. He had shown me how to hold a pen properly, guiding my fingers without correcting me out loud. "Don't rush it," he'd said. "Work speaks when it's ready." He believed in effort over titles, substance over polish. He never explained his values as lessons. He lived them. That steadiness stayed with me. It was the one thing I never dropped, even when everything else asked me to. Back in the present, the weight of that inheritance pressed differently. The same restraint that once kept me grounded was now being used to erase me. I could see it clearly for the first time. My quiet had protected the system, not me. It had allowed others to decide my place without needing my consent. A door opened behind me. Footsteps approached, then slowed. Someone cleared their throat. "Hey," a voice said, careful. "I didn't expect to see you out here." It was one of the older facilities managers. We'd spoken years ago about the early days of the company, about the first building that no longer stood. He didn't say my name loudly. He didn't say it at all. He just nodded, a small acknowledgement, then added, "Your grandfather would have hated the way this morning went." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He gave me a brief look that said more than his words had. Then he walked away, leaving the sentence unfinished. It wasn't an explanation. It wasn't help. But it was something else entirely. Someone remembered. I stayed where I was, letting that settle. I didn't chase him down. I didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to hear answers to. Acting now would turn curiosity into suspicion. I needed to see more before I spoke. I straightened and looked back at the building. Sunlight caught the glass at a different angle now, sharper, less forgiving. I felt a thin line form inside me. Not anger, not resolve. Something quieter, more deliberate. I didn't know it yet, but that morning wasn't done testing me. I stayed near the side lot, back leaned against a low wall still warmed by the late morning sun, watching people file past, some rushing, some meandering. No one looked at me directly. A few recognized me. I could tell by the pause in their steps or the way their voices dipped when they noticed I was still standing there, but none stopped. That silence had started to feel familiar, expected. Then, something shifted. It wasn't loud. It never was, not in places like this. But I've spent my life noticing the quiet things, shifts in posture, hesitations in tone, side glances exchanged too quickly to mean nothing. 2 security staff walked past the hedge that bordered the parking structure, slowing just enough as they turned their heads toward me. Not obvious, not confrontational, but their pace changed. Their eyes did that careful scan trained into them by months of protocol. I stood upright, brushing the dust off my sleeves out of habit more than necessity. The taller one, security supervisor by his badge and walk, approached first. "Excuse me, sir," he said, voice flat but polite. "Would you mind stepping over here for a quick clarification?" "Clarification?" I asked, not moving yet. "Just a routine follow-up. Nothing to worry about." That phrase, "nothing to worry about," I'd heard it before, on hospital forms, at bank counters, from school principals calling home. Every time someone said it, it meant something had already gone sideways. Still, I nodded and followed him down the walkway toward the entrance of the security annex tucked along the side of the building, small, tucked behind frosted windows, where badge issues and visitor check-ins were handled. The other guard trailed behind us like a silent period at the end of a sentence I hadn't written. Inside, it smelled faintly of printer ink and disinfectant, the kind of place meant to feel clean and neutral. One of the desks had an old monitor blinking quietly. Another had a clipboard with several pages turned down at the top corner. There was no urgency, no alarm, just process. "Can I ask what this is about?" I said, keeping my voice calm. The supervisor didn't answer right away. Instead, he nodded to a woman seated behind the glass divider. She tapped her screen, eyes flicking from me to the supervisor. No one said my name. No one had to. The moment clicked. This wasn't about security. This was about authority, about control. And I wasn't being asked. I was being moved, quietly, without fuss, from one column to another, from insider to uncertain, maybe even to threat, all wrapped in courtesy, as if that made it less personal. The supervisor turned back to me. "We're just double-checking access lists for the week," he said, but his eyes didn't match the script. "We'll just need to verify your identification again." I reached into my coat pocket slowly, handed over my license and the old company badge, which I hadn't yet, removed from my wallet. He took them both without comment. A murmur crackled over his shoulder radio, garbled, clipped. I caught a word. Instruction, then another. Authorization. Not his call, and not standard. He nodded slightly to himself, like confirming something only he could see. "If you just wait here for a moment." I stayed standing, though there was a chair nearby. I wasn't ready to lower myself. Minutes passed, long enough for doubt to start whispering. Then a shorter man, one I vaguely recognized from the executive admin team, passed through the hallway. He stopped briefly, eyes locking on mine with a flicker of discomfort. He opened his mouth, then shut it, and kept walking. So, that's how it was going to be. No announcements, no explanations, just closed doors, redirected glances, and procedures doing the heavy lifting of exclusion. I realized, with a sudden clarity, that someone had decided I was now inconvenient, and someone else had made it their job to quietly remove the inconvenience. There wouldn't be a confrontation. There never is when people believe they can wash their hands afterward. I could walk out. That option was there, clean and unremarkable. I could let this play out, go back to my car, pretend the badge never existed, pretend the years I'd poured into this company, into this family, hadn't just been erased by a single administrative breath. But then I imagined how the story would be told behind closed doors. He left on his own, they'd say. Didn't make a scene. As if silence meant agreement. And that's when the question twisted itself inside me. Was I going to let them write my ending too? My fingers curled slightly, not into fists, but into something harder to define. I wasn't going to yell. That would be easy for them to handle. That would make me emotional. I wasn't going to beg. That would be expected. I just stayed, present, grounded, undeniable. A soft chime sounded on the receptionist's screen. She looked up, then to the supervisor, who returned and handed me my license. Not the badge. I'm going to need to hold on to this, he said, eyes a little softer now. We've been asked to review all inactive credentials. The word inactive hung between us like a dropped pin. Is that what I am now? I asked, voice low. He blinked once, then, with a tone that sounded rehearsed, we're just following procedure. Procedure. A shield for decisions no one wanted to claim. Behind me, I felt a stillness. I turned slightly to see that the lobby had grown quieter. 2 people lingered near the doorway, watching, pretending not to. I recognized one of them. She'd been at my grandfather's retirement ceremony, the one where I'd spoken. Back then, she'd smiled and called me the quiet one who listens better than most. Now she looked away. No one stepped forward. No one asked if this was a mistake. And in that moment, I knew. It wasn't. My stepbrother didn't need to be in the room. His fingerprints were all over the method, not messy, not loud, just enough silence in the right places to let the system carry out his will for him. I asked, one last time, "Is there someone I can speak to directly?" The supervisor shifted. "You can file a request for access reinstatement through HR." "HR," I repeated, flatly. He nodded, as if that settled it. I turned toward the glass exit, the door humming slightly as it opened with my motion. The air outside had cooled just a little, clouds pulling closer over the sky. The driveway stretched out ahead of me, flanked by cars with tinted windows and personalized plates. The world was moving on, and I had been gently nudged to the edges. A voice behind me called, "Sir, one last thing." I turned. "May I see your ID again?" he asked. "For verification." That's when I understood they were done pretending this was routine. The supervisor didn't even look me in the eye this time. He tapped something on the screen behind the desk, then cleared his throat, adjusting his stance like a man who'd just been handed a script he didn't write, but had no choice but to read. "We're escalating this," he said simply. His voice had lost all of its earlier softness. No explanation, no detail, just procedure, again. I stood still. I didn't ask. Why? I already knew. The moment had shifted. The way you can tell a conversation has ended even if nobody walks away. I took a quiet breath, steadied myself, and asked, "Is my stepbrother on the property?" He blinked. "He's nearby." "Tell him I'd like to speak to him, directly." The supervisor hesitated, then gave a slight nod and stepped away. I didn't move. I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of pacing or sitting or fidgeting. I was calm. I was tired, yes, but not broken. A few minutes passed. I heard a car engine turn off just outside the building, the slow slam of a heavy door. I didn't have to look to know it was him. He walked in like he belonged everywhere. Navy blazer, phone still in hand, thumb casually scrolling even as he approached me. No urgency, just that smug, confident stride he'd perfected since we were kids, the one that said, "I already won." He stopped 3 feet in front of me, didn't offer a greeting, just glanced up and said, "I assume you've been briefed." "I'm not here to make a scene," I said, voice low but firm. "But I'm telling you now, this has gone too far. If you keep pushing this, there will be consequences. Not threats. Just facts." He didn't flinch. "You've turned this into something bigger than family politics," I continued. "You're inviting legal attention, public attention. If you're smart, you'll walk this back before it reaches a point you can't control." A slight smirk touched the edge of his mouth. "Are we pretending you're in a position to give ultimatums now?" "This isn't an ultimatum. It's a warning. I'm giving you a chance to undo it. Cleanly." He shifted his weight and folded his arms. "You think standing here calmly makes you look rational, but we both know the board only hears one voice when it counts. And I'm guessing that voice didn't mention I still have access to the original incorporation documents, emails?" His smile faltered for half a second. "I've kept quiet longer than I should have," I added. "I won't anymore." He leaned in slightly. "Then don't." He turned and nodded once toward the supervisor, who seemed to have been waiting for that cue. That's all it took. One nod, and the game was set in motion. I heard it before I saw anything. The brief, clipped transmission over the desk radio. "Yes, possible internal fraud. Request outside assistance. As precaution." Fraud. The word punched the air out of the room. Not yelled, not dramatic, just dropped like a pebble in a still pond, and the ripples were instant. I looked directly at the security supervisor. "Did you just say fraud?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned his back and stepped into the adjacent room, muttering into his radio, leaving the door ajar. Behind me, I heard someone gasp, probably a staffer walking past. The echo of the word was doing more damage than any physical force could have. This wasn't about a misunderstanding, not anymore. This was about rewriting who I was in real time. A few more quiet steps. I turned and saw my stepbrother again, now speaking softly on his phone, not bothering to lower his voice completely. "Yes, if they ask, say he hasn't been employed here in any active capacity. Miscommunication with credentials. Yes, we're correcting it." Correcting. They were painting over me like a blemish on a corporate portrait. Then I heard it. Just a few words from the other room, but enough to settle something cold into my chest. "They'll probably arrive within 15. Arrive. Police." I didn't panic. I didn't raise my voice or wave my arms. I stood in place, letting the weight of that word land. I turned back to the supervisor as he returned to the room. "You're calling the police?" He glanced toward my stepbrother, then back at me. "We're required to document and refer certain inconsistencies in credential status. Is there a specific charge being made?" I asked. "It's not that formal," he said. Just a standard precaution. But then came the part that broke the illusion. The supervisor added without blinking, "You may be temporarily detained until clarity is established. Standard procedure may involve restraints to ensure safety." Restraints. They meant handcuffs. My fingers twitched just once, but I held myself still. This was no longer about discomfort or boundaries. This was about erasure. Humiliation wasn't the goal anymore. Elimination was. Somewhere between the call and the protocol, they'd made a choice. I wasn't inconvenient. I was disposable. And still, part of me wanted to believe that someone, anyone, might step forward and say, "Wait, hold on." But no one did. There were eyes. There were ears. There were people whose entire careers had been shaped under my grandfather's legacy. And yet, no one opened their mouth. I looked to my stepbrother one last time. "You really want this on the record?" I asked, quiet but firm. "You want to explain this when the footage goes public? When the papers get wind of how this company treats its own?" He just smiled. "Footage is a funny thing. Depends on who's holding the camera." That was it. That was all he had to say. Outside in the distance, I heard the sound of sirens. Not loud yet, but unmistakable. A reminder that once certain wheels are in motion, they don't stop just because someone changes their mind. I didn't move. I didn't run. I simply stood there as the system that had once been built by my family rolled forward like a machine that no longer recognized its creator. Then I saw it, clipped to the belt of the guard walking toward me from the outer hall. Silver, standard issue, government property, handcuffs, and my stepbrother, arms crossed now, leaning slightly against the doorframe, watching me the way a chess player watches the final piece fall. He thought calling the police would finally put me in my place. But as the two officers stepped through the glass doors, badges on chests, belts weighted down with the symbols of order, I knew it wasn't about law. It was about optics, control, and shame. Their approach was calm, procedural, no rush, no drawn weapons. Just steady eyes scanning the situation, landing on me with practiced neutrality. One of them, the older of the two, asked for my identification. I pulled my wallet from my back pocket, handed over my driver's license without hesitation. "Can you confirm your relationship to this company, sir?" he asked. "I'm a former executive and co-founder's grandson," I replied evenly. "I have legal standing regarding several internal matters. What exactly is the issue?" He looked down at a small tablet. "We were dispatched in response to a call reporting misrepresentation and unauthorized presence on private property." My stepbrother, who had been standing a few feet off to the side, took a single step closer. "He's been trespassing," he said. "He accessed restricted areas under false pretense." "That's a lie," I said without raising my voice. The officer glanced between us. "Sir," he said to me, "this isn't an arrest at this time, but we do need to complete a report. Could you please come with us to the security gate?" I nodded. They didn't grab me. They didn't push or accuse. But I could feel the tightening around me, like the quiet pressure of a noose pulling thread by thread. Every word spoken was polite, but every word pushed me further toward the edge. We stepped outside. The sunlight hit hard now, harsh and indifferent. The parking lot had grown quieter, but not empty. A few employees lingered, half-heartedly pretending to check their phones. I saw one woman hold her screen up, slowly, subtly, recording. My name would be in her camera roll now, sandwiched between dog videos and lunch photos. That was how fast it could all flip, from bloodline to mugshot fodder. I stood by the patrol car, arms at my sides. I said nothing, but my silence wasn't surrender. It was the silence of a man absorbing, not retreating. "You're being recorded," one officer said. "Standard for public interactions." I nodded again. Then came the words I knew would shift everything. "We're going to have to place you in restraints while we complete the procedure. It's policy when detaining near company property." I looked at the officer. He wasn't being cruel. He wasn't even making eye contact. Just following instructions handed down from someone higher up, someone he didn't know was lying. The cuffs came out of the leather pouch. Silver, smooth, familiar. "I understand," I said. He stepped behind me. I placed my hands together, wrists forward. The metal clicked once, then again. Not tight, but tight enough to speak for themselves. The cold was immediate, sending a pulse through my arms, up into my chest. I didn't wince, didn't flinch. But inside, something cracked, not from pain, but from the memory of what this family used to stand for. Behind me, I heard a soft exhale. "Unnecessary, but predictable," my stepbrother said. I turned my head slightly, just enough to catch his smirk. "This could have been avoided," he added. "All you had to do was walk away." "I did," I said quietly. "Years ago. You just followed." One of the officers glanced between us but didn't speak. They weren't there for the backstory. They were there for the image. An escorted man in cuffs, without incident. "Sir," one of them said, "if you cooperate fully, this will go faster. It doesn't have to be more complicated than it is." It wasn't meant as a threat. It was offered like a handout, a chance to walk back into silence. I shook my head once. "There's nothing complicated about standing in the truth. That's what I'm doing." A pause. "You can end this now," my stepbrother said. "All I need is your signature on the withdrawal." "And you can still fix it," I replied. "All you need is a spine." His jaw clenched. He wasn't used to being spoken to that way. Not here, not now, not in front of uniformed backup. For a second, his confidence flickered, but he caught it. "Walk away, or be walked through this," he said, more quietly. I looked out at the lot. People still watched. I recognized one face. A man who'd worked under me 10 years ago in logistics. He didn't wave. He didn't nod. He just stared, then turned and walked away. That hurt more than the cuffs. This wasn't just a fall from grace. It was a silence that had been prepared in advance. An erasure choreographed like a ballet. I was no longer a man in the wrong place. I was a headline in progress. Still, I refused to meet humiliation with pleading. I thought of my grandfather, his voice, always calm, always principled. When they can't take the truth from your mouth, they'll try to take it from your hands. He never said what to do when they came for both, so I made my own promise. No matter what happened next, I wouldn't let rage write the ending. I'd let the truth walk through the door on its own feet, even if mine were shackled for a while. One of the officers guided me gently by the arm toward the patrol car. They opened the back door. I ducked slightly, bent at the knees, and eased into the seat. No sirens. Not yet. Just the sound of my stepbrother turning away, pulling out his phone, already preparing whatever next step he thought would cement his version of the story. He thought he'd won. He didn't realize the moment those cuffs closed was the moment he lost control of the story. I sat in the back of the patrol car, hands folded awkwardly in my lap, wrists still caught in steel. The doors shut with that final, unmistakable sound, soft but total. Through the partition glass, I could see the back of the officer's head, the slow movement of the gear shift, and the slight turn of the wheel as we eased out from the company's front loop. No sirens, no rush, just the quiet churn of tires rolling over concrete. The world outside had turned down its volume. People were still out there, workers returning to desks, onlookers drifting back to safety. But behind that thick pane of glass, it all felt distant, like I was underwater, watching the world above the surface forget me. I rested my head back against the seat. The air inside smelled faintly of vinyl and old paper. I thought about how often justice is dressed up in routine, and how quickly silence can become someone else's story. I didn't speak. Not when the younger officer glanced back at me through the rearview mirror. Not when the older one tapped his screen and muttered something about intake protocols. I stayed still. Let them believe I was defeated. That was fine. The more they assumed, the less they'd see. Outside, by the curb, my stepbrother stood talking to another officer who had arrived late to the scene. His stance was relaxed, arms folded, weight on one leg, like a man giving a press interview about something tedious but necessary. I couldn't hear his words, but I didn't need to. I knew that posture. He wasn't just managing the situation, he was performing it. He gestured with open palms, head tilting like he was being gracious, calm, reasonable. The kind of man who regrets this is necessary while drawing a deeper cut. Then he started layering it on. I watched his mouth move faster. The officer beside him began taking notes. The rhythm changed. I could see the tale being rewritten in real time. I could almost hear the headlines he was crafting behind those half smiles. He's not well. He showed up demanding access. He made implied threats to company staff. He's been unstable for years. None of it spoken with venom, just steady, casual poison, enough to sound official, enough to plant doubt. And he knew, once doubt takes root, it can grow faster than truth ever could. Inside the car, I let out a quiet breath. My jaw tensed, but I said nothing. I didn't bang the glass, didn't plead. I let him dig. Then it happened. One of the officers, blonde, mid-30s, the quieter one, paused when a name was mentioned. I couldn't hear the full sentence, but I caught the shift in his body. My grandfather's name had come up. The officer stopped writing, just for a second. His head tilted and his brows knit together, just slightly. It wasn't confusion. It was recognition. He glanced toward the vehicle, toward me, and for the first time, I saw the narrative flicker. But he didn't act. He didn't step away. The moment passed. A seed, though. That was enough. Minutes later, we pulled around to the side lot of the local precinct, a quiet, low-slung building with brick walls and a single flagpole wavering in the sun. They didn't march me through the front lobby. Instead, they guided me through a side door, tucked away from the public. Inside, the air was cool, clean, impersonal. They walked me down a narrow corridor and into a holding room, small, beige, and silent. One desk, 2 chairs, a metal bench against the wall. No yelling, no chaos, just process. They uncuffed me without ceremony and asked me to sit. As they moved through the motions, name verification, brief questions, I caught the shift again. The older officer remained detached, moving by the book. But the younger one, he hesitated now. He lingered after each question. His eyes flicked toward me, searching for something not on the form. Then came the paperwork. From a side door, a woman stepped in, Mid-40s, dark suit, neat clipboard in hand. She looked like someone from legal or administration. One of those people whose power lies in the forms they manage. She handed something to the officer. He glanced at it, then read it aloud without inflection. A formal complaint had been filed by my stepbrother. Accusations of attempted misrepresentation, disruption of internal operations, and verbal intimidation. I let him finish. "Is there anything you'd like to say for the record?" the clerk asked. I looked at her, then shook my head. "Not yet." She seemed slightly surprised by the calm. "This document will be attached to a pending review," she said. "It will be noted that you declined to comment." "Understood." She nodded and turned to leave, but right before the door closed behind her, she hesitated, just long enough that it wasn't accidental. Her eyes caught mine again, and something passed between us. Not sympathy, not alliance, recognition. She knew who I was, and more importantly, she knew he knew who I was, but she didn't speak. Not yet. They left me alone for a few minutes after that. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, letting the silence settle. No clock ticked, no voices echoed. The quiet was complete. I thought of all the times I'd been told to let things go, to be the bigger man, to keep the family name clean. And now here I was, sitting in a holding room while my stepbrother spun the family name into a weapon. I could have shouted. I could have demanded phone calls, thrown accusations, named names. But that would have served his version. So instead, I waited. Not because I was helpless, because I wasn't finished. Outside the room, I heard footsteps. A door opened and closed. A voice said, "They're meeting in the West Conference Room." A name followed, a board member I hadn't heard in years. And just like that, I knew the next move was already in motion. He thought paperwork would bury me. He forgot paperwork can also resurrect the truth. They thought the meeting would happen without me, that by the time the board gathered, I'd still be tucked away in a holding room somewhere, just another unfortunate situation handled quietly. But the system has a way of resetting itself when you know where to lean. When I stepped through the polished glass doors of the boardroom that afternoon, the room fell into a stillness so sharp you could hear the air conditioner hum. No cuffs, no escort, just me, walking in with calm purpose. Eyes turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A few backs stiffened. Others subtly leaned forward. At the far end of the long table, my stepbrother froze. He hadn't seen me since the officers took me. His expression flickered from confusion to disbelief. Then it settled on a smile too tight to be genuine. I didn't smile back. I took the empty seat left for me. Third from the right, same place I used to sit beside my grandfather. My hand rested on the lacquered wood of the table. The room felt smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just grown out of the space they tried to stuff me into. The board chair, an older man with an unshakable tone and silver-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat. "Let's begin." But before anyone could open a folder, a woman stood up at the far end. "Before we proceed," she said, "there's a matter of record." She was from legal. I remembered her vaguely, precise, no nonsense. The kind of professional who never raised her voice because her documents always spoke louder. She stepped forward, handed a sealed packet to the chair, and announced, "The estate's revision was filed and notarized 3 months prior to Mr. Edward Mason's passing. Witnessed, certified. No contests were entered during the validation window." She paused. "It is now entered into the company's formal records." My stepbrother let out a short, dry laugh. "That's not possible. That was never..." He stopped himself. Too late. The chair looked at him, then turned to me. Would you like to respond? I shook my head. Let the documents speak. The legal counsel adjusted her glasses and continued, this time reading directly from the notarized form. Majority ownership of Mason Holdings, totaling 51%, is hereby assigned to... She glanced up to meet my eyes. Mr. Daniel Mason, effective immediately upon the passing of Edward Mason. No raised voices, no gasps, just a thick silence that stretched across the room like fog rolling in. Someone dropped a pen. Across from me, my stepbrother's jaw slackened. His shoulders dropped an inch. The color drained from his face. His hand found the edge of the table, gripping it like it was the only solid thing left in the room. He opened his mouth once, then again, but no words came. The chair looked toward him. Would you like to request a recess, Mr. Mason? He didn't answer. His knees bent, not in a dramatic collapse, but in that slow, sinking way a man leans when the weight finally catches up. He half sat, half fell into his chair. No one moved to comfort him. Not even the board member who usually echoed his every word. They all stayed still, watching the air drain from his certainty. I remained seated. I didn't gloat. I didn't deliver a speech. This wasn't the moment for triumph. It was the moment truth caught up. So I spoke just once. I didn't come to burn the house down, I said. I came to make sure the foundation held. The legal counsel nodded. The chair offered a soft, formal, noted. The meeting resumed, but the tone had shifted entirely. No more tight smiles, no more sidelong glances. Just paperwork now, the kind that couldn't be twisted, silenced, or erased. When it adjourned, I stood, gathered my papers, and stepped back into the hallway alone. The sound of my shoes echoed against the tile as I walked past portraits of executives, my grandfather among them. I paused for a second beneath his frame, not out of nostalgia, not for approval, just acknowledgement. I'd kept my promise. Winning didn't feel like triumph. It felt like the end of a long misunderstanding. I walked out with the majority vote, but I didn't feel heavier or lighter. There wasn't a moment of fist-clenching satisfaction or silent celebration. Just a quiet breath that came a little deeper than usual as I stepped out of the boardroom and into the cool air outside. The late afternoon light was soft, stretching shadows across the pavement. A few reporters stood near the gate, phones in hand, waiting for a statement. I didn't stop. Let the silence be my only comment. Let them write what they wanted. That noise wasn't mine to manage anymore. My phone buzzed, calls, messages, voicemails piling up from names I hadn't heard in months. I didn't answer a single one. The same people who watched me get walked out in handcuffs were now asking if I had a minute to talk. Funny how quickly relevance shifts. By the time I reached my car, the building behind me already looked smaller, less like a fortress, more like a box of old ideas we all outgrew but refused to throw away. My stepbrother hadn't shown his face since the vote. He'd left through another exit. Or maybe he was still in that conference room, sitting in a silence that wasn't new to him, just finally directed at him. I didn't hate him. And that surprised me more than anything. That night, I drove to the one place that hadn't changed, the old cabin my grandfather used to take me to in the summers, just an hour from the city, tucked behind a line of quiet trees. It sat like a memory refusing to fade. I didn't turn on the lights when I walked in. I knew the space by feel. The worn floorboards still creaked in the same spots. The leather armchair still faced the empty fireplace. Dust had gathered, but it was the kind that felt more like pause than neglect. I stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle over me. The smell of cedar, old books, and time. I poured myself a glass of water and sat in the chair where my grandfather used to read with one hand resting on the dog-eared pages and the other on my shoulder. The room didn't speak, but it held everything I needed to hear. I thought back to the first time I asked him what power meant. I was 9. He'd smiled, not the public smile people remembered him for, but the private one, gentle, real. He said, "Power is just permission to serve. If you think it's something you own, you've already lost it." At the time, I didn't understand it. I thought power was about winning arguments or holding the bigger office. Now I knew better. The vote had given me ownership. The documents had handed me the company. But they hadn't given me what I used to want, my brother. Because the truth was, he'd never really been one. We shared a last name and little else, and maybe that was the grief I hadn't let myself feel until now. Not over what happened, but what never really was. Later, I checked my phone. There was a message from him, just one word. Well, no punctuation, no apology, no anger, just that. I didn't respond. Some things aren't meant to be repaired, and not because of pride or pain, but because they were never whole to begin with. He would go on with his life, maybe bitter, maybe relieved. That was his road to walk. I had mine. As the night deepened, I stepped out onto the porch. The stars were clearer here. The kind of sky you could get lost in if you let your thoughts drift too far. I thought about what I would protect from here forward. Not just the business, though that mattered too, but my daughter's sense of fairness, my wife's trust, my father's memory, and this quiet. I wasn't interested in grand speeches or revenge. I didn't need a legacy carved in glass towers. Just a name my children wouldn't have to flinch from. Just a night where I could sleep without rehearsing old arguments. There are victories that make noise, and there are victories that let you sleep at night. I finally understood the difference.